Episode 51, titled Explain Data Documentation Artifacts, Dictionaries, Flow Diagrams, Explainability Reports. Documentation artifacts are treated as tools for shared understanding rather than as administrative overhead. When teams scale, the hardest problems are often not technical but interpretive, such as what a field really means, which transformation changed a number, or why a score shifted between two reports. Good artifacts reduce those interpretive gaps by making meaning portable, so a dataset can be reused safely and a result can be defended without a private expert translating it. When documentation artifacts are designed well, they shorten meetings, prevent rework, and make governance feel practical instead of abstract. A data dictionary is a structured description of fields that captures what each field means, how it is represented, and what rules govern its use. It typically includes the field name, a plain language definition, the data type, units when applicable, and any constraints that affect interpretation, such as whether null is allowed or whether a value is derived. The dictionary also clarifies relationships, such as whether a field is an identifier, a category label, or a measure that should be aggregated, which prevents common analytical mistakes. When a dictionary exists and is easy to access, analysts spend less time reverse engineering columns and more time solving the business question correctly. Allowed values and examples belong in a strong dictionary because ambiguity often lives in the corners, such as how categories are coded and what unusual values represent. A label like status can hide multiple systems of meaning, such as whether closed includes resolved and canceled, or whether pending includes on hold, and those choices change totals. Listing allowed values sets expectations for what should appear, which makes it easier to spot corruption or unexpected upstream changes when new values arrive. Examples also help because they show real patterns, such as the format of an identifier or the typical range of a metric, which makes interpretation faster for new users and reviewers. Including rules in the dictionary turns it from a glossary into a safety tool, because rules describe what makes a value valid and how it should be handled. Rules can cover format constraints, such as whether dates use a specific time zone standard, whether identifiers are unique, and whether a numeric value is allowed to be negative. They can also cover usage guidance, such as whether a field should be used for filtering, whether it is safe to group by, and whether it is stable over time. These rule details reduce mistakes like grouping by a high cardinality field that explodes report size, or treating a derived field as if it were a raw measurement. Flow diagrams describe how data moves and transforms across systems, focusing on the sequence from sources to outputs and the steps that change meaning. The diagram does not have to be artistic, but it must communicate direction, dependencies, and where the most important transformations occur. A simple flow view helps teams answer questions like where a field was added, where deduplication occurs, where enrichment joins happen, and where business rules are applied. When a number looks surprising, a flow diagram often reveals which step could plausibly explain the change, which speeds troubleshooting and reduces finger-pointing. A useful flow diagram captures sources, transformations, outputs, and key handoffs clearly, because handoffs are where responsibility and risk often shift. Sources can include operational databases, log feeds, external vendor data, or manually maintained reference lists, and each source has its own freshness, reliability, and change behavior. Transformations can include parsing, filtering, normalization, joining, aggregation, and classification, and the diagram should make clear which steps materially affect counts and definitions. Outputs include curated tables, dashboards, and executive summaries, and the handoffs between teams, such as from a platform team to an analytics team, should be visible because those boundaries shape who owns fixes when something breaks. Explainability reports focus on why results look the way they do, which is especially important when outputs are not intuitive from raw data alone. An explainability report can apply to a metric, a dashboard result, or a model score, and the goal is to document the drivers and logic so consumers can understand what influences the outcome. This is not about revealing every internal detail, but about making the result interpretable enough that it can be trusted and used responsibly. When explainability is absent, stakeholders either distrust the result or overtrust it, and both outcomes can lead to poor decisions. A model score scenario makes explainability needs concrete because scores often feel like black boxes to decision makers. Imagine a risk score used to prioritize investigations, where leaders notice that a particular system's score rose sharply even though no major incident was reported. An explainability report would describe the most influential factors that contributed to the score, such as a spike in failed logins, a new vulnerability finding, or a change in asset criticality classification. It would also note the time frame used, the data sources feeding the score, and any known limitations, such as delayed telemetry or missing coverage, so the audience can interpret the score as evidence rather than as fate. Documentation artifacts stay current when updates are tied to change events, because change is when meaning shifts and when drift begins. A change event might be a schema update, a new data source, a revised business rule, or an adjustment to a metric definition, and each of those should trigger a small documentation update. This linkage can be simple, such as a requirement that any pipeline change includes a dictionary update and a flow diagram touch when the change affects lineage. When updates are tied to change, documentation becomes a living part of delivery rather than a separate chore that is postponed until it becomes stale. Documentation drift is best prevented by naming owners and setting a review cadence, because unowned artifacts tend to decay quietly. Ownership answers who is responsible for accuracy, who approves updates, and who responds when the artifact conflicts with reality. Review cadence ensures that even when changes slip through, there is a scheduled moment to reconcile documentation with what is actually running, which is especially important in fast-moving environments. The cadence does not have to be frequent for every dataset, but high-impact metrics and shared reference tables deserve more regular attention because many reports depend on them. Searchability is part of documentation quality because the best artifact is useless if nobody can find it under pressure. Searchable artifacts have consistent naming, predictable structure, and indexing by the terms people actually use, such as common metric names, system names, and business concepts. Searchability also means avoiding private storage in personal folders because governance and shared understanding require shared access. When documentation is easy to search, teams ask fewer repetitive questions, and the questions they do ask tend to be higher value because basic definitions and lineage are already visible. Assumptions, exclusions, and known limitations should be stated explicitly because they are often the hidden reasons that two reports disagree. An exclusion can be as simple as filtering out test traffic, excluding decommissioned systems, or using only certain regions due to data availability, and those choices materially change results. Assumptions might include time zone interpretation, deduplication rules, or how missing values are treated, and limitations might include delayed feeds, partial telemetry, or intermittent collection gaps. When these are written plainly, stakeholders can interpret the output correctly, and analysts can avoid accidentally building conclusions on weak foundations. Validation of documentation artifacts is what keeps them honest, and it should include comparing artifacts to actual data and actual code paths. A dictionary can claim that a field has a certain type or allowed values, but a quick check of real records may reveal unexpected patterns that need to be documented or corrected. A flow diagram can claim that a transformation occurs in a certain stage, but code inspection may show that the logic moved during a refactor, creating a silent divergence between diagram and reality. When documentation is periodically validated against the running system, it becomes a trusted reference, which is the whole point of building it. A maintainable documentation set can be kept light by focusing on the artifacts that answer the most common and most costly questions. A minimal set often includes a data dictionary for key tables, a flow diagram for the main pipeline that produces shared metrics, and an explainability report template for results that drive decisions and require interpretation. The set should also include ownership and refresh notes so consumers understand who to contact and how current the data is. When this set is maintained consistently, it creates leverage because new reports can be built faster and mistakes become easier to detect before they reach leadership. To conclude, one practical action is to choose a single artifact to update today and make the update meaningful rather than cosmetic. Updating a data dictionary entry to clarify a metric definition, adding allowed values that recently changed, or adjusting a flow diagram to reflect a new handoff can immediately reduce confusion for other teams. Updating an explainability note for a score or metric can also prevent misinterpretation by leaders who rely on it for prioritization. A small, well-targeted update strengthens the overall governance foundation because it signals that documentation is part of the product, not an afterthought. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.